Thanks, Lee. Just a little bit on with what Lee was talking about is one of the things that we've tried to do at our firm is my partner and I, from the very beginning, and literally it's 21 years this month, that our goal was not to be traditional. The last thing we wanted to be accused of was being accountants. And I think we've done a pretty good job of that. I rarely get accused of that. And so, because it's a stereotype. I mean, you guys see the movies, you see what the pocket protectors and all this stuff looks like. And quite honestly, when you sit in a class for continuing education, you can understand why. I marvel at the fact that these are my peers, but that doesn't mean that they're bad people, it just means they're really, really smart people. But they're very focused from a technical perspective. And we found that what we need to do to assist the small and medium-sized companies grow is to really take a much more consulting approach, and one that is about adding value to their business. And when we first started out, it was something that was very, you're very hands-on. You're working with small businesses, and as we grew older, so did our clients, and they stayed with us, and they were looking for more and more services. And one of the things that we implemented was the financial planning component of helping our clients. And with that, because most of them are business owners, a big part of their assets are their business. I was looking at something over there. Like, oh wow, is that? Yeah, another cloud. Like, whoa. And for many of them, they were putting their souls, their money, their time, everything into their business, and the goal was, how do I get that to be my retirement plan? Now, there's ways to go as you get older. There's more things you're going to do in your business that are going to get you diversified, but that's the major asset. And there's some conflicts with those major assets, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But the first thing that you really need to understand about the business transition process is that it is not like selling real estate. It's not you go and get a comp and you put a for sale sign out and you wait for people to come. It doesn't work at all that way, because many times in businesses you are selling an intangible. You're selling goodwill. An example would be if I was selling my practice. I mean, the assets, the physical assets in the company aren't that great. But it's about the revenue stream, it's about the longevity of the clients, it's about the recurrence of the clients, and it's trying to determine what is that value and how do you get paid for it. And there are as many different ways to get paid for your business as there are ways to structure a deal. So, and I'll use some examples as we go along on some of the deals that we've done. But what we found out is, working with our clients for many years, we were doing a lot of business brokerage and M&A work, and that's mergers and acquisition work. We've been doing that for our whole career. And it wasn't until about 8 or 9 years ago that the state of Washington changed the rules and allowed accountants or CPAs to be able to take contingent fees or a commission. There was always this conflict going on, and in classic form, the state of Washington was like the 43rd state to actually adopt these new rules. We're not considered cutting edge when it comes to that stuff, but we found that we were doing 95% of that work already, and the business broker was the one that was listing the deal, would advertise it, and then we get involved in everything after that. And we finally said, we can do this. It's not that hard to market it. You just have to understand how it works. And so we decided to go step out into that arena. And there's not a lot of CPA firms, none that I know locally, that have taken an aggressive approach on this. Now, there are situations where you can't sell a business if you're doing audit work for that company. You run into some issues there. So if we had that situation, we'd probably back off on the audit the year before we're going to do this and have someone else do the audit so that there doesn't run into be a conflict of interest. So you have to still play around the rules, but it's a much different type of environment for an accountant to be doing that than doing the classic logging billable hours, because you're going to get paid when you sell it. And that drives accountants crazy. They want to be billing every month and getting paid. And it can be, you'll see that the process can be a very long time, so you have to be willing to write it. But I'll give you an example of where it paid off, especially for us last year. So it's not a real estate transaction. There's nothing physical to hold. It's hard to get title to these things, and there's no guarantees that when you buy it, it's going to continue to grow in value. And we'll talk about a couple of different scenarios where you see that potentially happening. And we'll have even a little video vignette here that you'll get a chance to watch. It's fun, but you'd be surprised how often that we actually see this happen. First thing I want to kind of go through is some of the technical aspects of the process. Now, like it says here, this can take 9 to 18 months. That's why it drives accountants crazy. Because it is a process that can go a long time, and it's very different than just sitting around doing taxes. We'll talk a little bit about the succession planning process, but this is the actual process of going through and figuring out how to help people sell their business. You're going to spend a lot of time trying to position the client and really evaluate the business and the client. There are many, many, many businesses that think that they're ready to sell and they're not even close. And usually the first question we ask them is, how much do you want to get for your business? And then it's our job to either verify that through different processes of business valuation, or tell them, if you want to get there, we've got to make some changes. I'll give you an example. As accountants, we're always helping our clients try to save tax dollars. Always. Nobody wants to pay the government, especially when you're a business owner. You're paying out all this other money. And that's fine. That's the American way. That's how it works. But what can happen is you can be aggressive in the write-offs that you're taking in a business in order to reduce your tax liability. Yet, when you're getting ready to sell, a lot of times those values are based on the net income of the company. And so you may be, really running a lot of your auto expenses, or you've got certain personal expenses that you can convert to business expenses, and you really pounded it down. Great, I saved 25 cents on the dollar. But what you did is you also screwed yourself out of about 4 to 1 on the value of the business. Because many times, short of doing a full-blown business valuation for a business, it's usually done based on a multiple of earnings. Or multiple of EBITDA, earnings before interest, depreciation, amortization, taxes. There's other formulas to that too, but if you've really pounded that down, it makes it a little hard when you try to add back some things that are personal, and the buyers kind of get a little leery of, how come so many add backs? So many times we'll talk with our clients and say, look, if you're thinking of selling, we need to be thinking a few years out. Optimally, we would like to know at 10 years out. And I tell many people that buy their business, the first thing that they should do after they buy their business is start planning their exit. Because they don't know how long they're going to be in it, but it doesn't mean you can't be thinking about when you want to pull the trigger. So we have to sit down and tell them, look, you're going to pay a little more tax here for a few years. Just get over it. But it's going to get you 4 times what you would get by paying that tax by building the value up. And for some businesses, if they're very profitable, it could be 10 times. It's remarkable. And so you have to kind of get them set. And that's what that first process is. You get them talking about it. You get them to understand the process. You get them to understand the value and why business buyers will look at it this way. And you ultimately have to get them to commit to the process. And there's different ways to do those selling options. Once you've done that, then we start really kicking in, and we have to go out and identify the buyers. We put together a full-blown prospectus on the company. We have to generate all the financials. We have to make sure that all these numbers tie to tax returns. The client's going to spend $5,000 to $10,000 just up front to get that piece done that's going to be used to market. Identifying the buyers, there are many different buyers out there. There's strategic buyers, somebody in the industry that's looking to expand. It could be a family business, and we'll talk a little bit about that. It could be a key employee. We just did one of those this past year, and it was a $40 million sale with a key employee. And he didn't have to write a check to get into the thing. But we were able to structure the deal so the bank put $15 million in, and there's an earnout, and we'll talk about what those things are. You really start to develop, that's developing the confidential review. And then you ultimately start marketing to buyers. And that's one of those things that a lot of it's done on the internet. A lot of it's done by email and direct mail. A lot of it is making phone calls to key strategic partners or buyers in the industry that might be looking to expand. And I can tell you right now, in this industry right now, it's very different in that the banks are making it very difficult for people to sell their businesses because it's hard to borrow money. Many of them have to look at SBA financing, which is used to be, wasn't the only game in town, and nobody wanted to use it because it was expensive money, but now it's the only game in town for many of these businesses, the smaller ones. And so because of the banks doing that, what's happening is, depending on the business you're in, there's bigger companies out there trying to buy smaller businesses and roll them up into their business. An example is the medical billing industry. Huge roll-up where they're out there, these companies are out there buying these little mom and pop billing companies and rolling them together to get critical mass to ultimately sell them to a much larger company. You see a lot of that stuff going on. So you have to contact those people and let them know you've got something going on. But it does change the dynamic, and it does change the way you get paid. So we get out there, we really hit the marketing of the buyers, and once you finally get to that point and you start getting some letters of intent, then you get in the creativity of this. This is how do you structure a deal to make it work for the buyer and make it work for the seller, and everybody walk away somewhat happy. And that can take on many, many, many different roles. Like I said, there's the straight cash deal, which you'll see, say, a private equity group that has a whole bunch of money that their investors are telling them to spend and get me some return, is out there, and they may go out and find a company to buy, to roll up, and it could be, they could pay 10 times the net EBITDA. There's some that are paying 20 times. Now, those are unheard of, and those are for very profitable companies, and when I say that, it's probably the company that has $5 million in EBITDA and up. So the higher that number, the more money they can get for it. So that's the other reason you're trying to not worry about the tax side and get that net income number up. That may be an all-cash deal. It may be a cash and some stock deal. It may be, it could be a cash, some mezzanine financing, which is some really high-interest money that's for a short period of time, that once the company proves itself under the new owners, it gets paid off. I mean, there's a lot of ways to structure that. You get down to the smaller deals, it could be some money down. Usually in this day and age, they want to get more money down. The bank could loan on that, and the seller's going to have to participate in these transactions. What that means is they're either going to have to carry a note, and they don't like doing it, and I usually tell a seller, you only carry as much of a note that you're willing to lose, because there's many times that you may not see that money if whoever you sold it to doesn't perform. And a third way is doing an earnout, and we see a lot of the earnout stuff now because you can't base the price as much on history because the last few years have been terrible. So you're trying to get them not to focus on the history, you're trying to get them to focus on the future. And to get them to focus on the future means you have to be willing to prove your concept and ride along with them. And if you hit certain benchmarks, then you're going to start getting your payment out. Again, it's a risk. And there's many times those, if you don't set those parameters correctly, the business owner will not walk away with any money on that. So it's a much different environment. And one of the things, for example, working with SBA, they've got a lot of interesting restrictions. And so, for example, they don't allow earnouts. So it's got to be a note. So that limits the buyers that you might be working with. They sometimes will only sell to qualified buyers that have experience in the industry. Again, it can limit your options. So you have to get creative, and you have to really pound the street looking for these buyers, even though there's a lot of them out there. Some of them are bottom feeding, some of them are trying to pick up stuff for cheap. They'll always be doing that because they think the economy is driving that. But it's all about setting your seller's expectations, and many times they're not close when you first start out. As I said, you hope to get to a letter of intent, and from that letter of intent, then the buyer goes into their due diligence mode, and it's our job to provide a lot of that information. You may see, if you were working with just a business broker, I'll back up. One of the unique things about us is that because we have the accounting background, because we have the business valuation background, we're not attorneys, so we don't try to practice law without a license. So we try to bring the attorneys in on that stuff at the end. But because we do all of that, as a broker, the client can rely on us to kind of handle that instead of going to a classic business broker who wouldn't have the accounting background or the tax background and would have to bring in other professionals to do it. And we try not to let the seller's CPA get too involved in this, because there have been times where the CPA actually would crater the deal. They didn't want to lose a client. it's strange, but it's very interesting. And if they were truly, looking for their client best interest, they would be trying to help them get to that point, because if they were backed off and really look at this, there was a financial plan that was done 10 years ago that they could be involved in trying to help take that money and help them do something with it ultimately in retirement. I mean, I have a securities license and insurance license. I've never written an insurance contract, and I've never sold any stock. But I have a non-equity partner that's a financial planner. And his job is to help us with our clients put these detailed plans together on how to maximize the value and ultimately get to where they want to be. Our job is to sell it, but we use that as the map to get us there. And it gives us a lot of action plans that are going to allow us to do that. So this process takes some time. Ultimately, you execute that purchase and sale agreement. This is a good thing and a bad thing. This is the document that they're ultimately going to sign. The bad thing is that once it's done, I have to turn it over to both sides' attorneys. And that is a mind-numbing process. They can drag their feet. They're very much working for their clients. They get very nitpicky, and I usually have to bring them together and tell them, you guys are cratering this deal, and your seller wants to do it. You don't want them to renegotiate the deal, which sometimes they try to do, and they all have their little nuances, their little things that are their hot buttons when it comes to putting these deals together. So you'll never see the same kind of purchase and sale agreement on any deal at all. And then finally, closing the transaction. And as my partner and I talk, we don't believe it till it's done. I've had to bring deals back from the dead at the 11th hour for stupid reasons. Somebody didn't show up to the closing on time, or we didn't get some piece of paper quick enough. It's amazing. And somebody all of a sudden gets their feathers ruffled and walks away from the table. It isn't over till it's over, until you're sitting there and the money's transferred. And seen it many times. So that's probably why it's a very exhilarating process. You can really get into it, but it has a lot of highs and lows for the broker. And then being an accountant, a CPA, someone who is used to some things that are much more structured, it isn't for everybody. But it can be a lot of fun when you close them. The one that we sold, for example, this year, the $40 million one. Now, to give you an idea of the profitability in these kinds of jobs, you're usually going to be selling a business anywhere from, our commission would be anywhere from 6 to 10% on a transaction, depending on the size. Well, on a $40 million deal, it's more like about a 2%. Well, that's okay. That's a lot of money. And so we always still track our time, because we're accountants. We're going to look at that stuff, so we're always looking at the realization. And my normal billing rate's $275 an hour, and I had a total of about $75,000 worth of time into this. My partner looked at it and we were laughing. It's like, I got all my billable hours in for the next 2 years. I don't even have to come to work. But that he wasn't going to let me get away with that. But you can have those situations. I mean, it can be it's a very profitable thing, but it's a very risky thing to do too. And it wasn't like the client didn't get value. They got a lot of value. I mean, walking them through that process and taking them out of it, having somebody else do the negotiations and be the focal point, it's a huge relief to a lot of these sellers. So you earn your money. You do earn it. And you don't hit those $40 million ones that often. I'm hoping I'll have another one of those before I retire. But it's just one of those unique situations. But you usually do fine. I mean, it's a good process to be through. Let's see what else we got here. So one of the things you have to know is what you're selling and who the target market is. And I've talked a little bit about that. And sometimes it's not as much about what you're selling. It's about an income stream. You may be selling a franchise, for example, and a lot of times franchises are not. It's not about buying one franchise and making tons of money. It's usually that's usually just buying a job for someone, and you've got somebody else at a corporate level that is telling you how to do your job, even though you own this business. So in the franchise business, you're looking to be able to get multiple locations in order to really maximize your opportunity to make a lot of money doing that. And that means you have to be a manager, not so much work in the shop. So that takes a certain type of individual that would buy a business. Or you have to evaluate the client and or the buyers and say, who is it that you're selling to? And that's a person like that may fit very well. I mean, whether it's a McDonald's or Taco Bell or whatever it is, that's a certain type of business buyer. As I said, there's the key employee. You might find a key person that's charge of sales and has been with the company a number of years, and he really wants to take a run, or she really wants to take a run at buying that business. Okay, we can put that together, but usually they don't have any money. They haven't saved any money to do that. So it means the seller's going to have to, one, convince a bank that it makes sense. And a lot of times it's not that hard to do because there's this consistency that's rolling through. But it also means the seller has got to spend some time training that person to be a business owner, because they may have been a key employee in the business, but they weren't working with them on the financial side. They had no interactions with the banks. They weren't dealing with employees on a day-to-day basis and the HR issues that go along. They were out selling, and that's what they did well, and it makes sense, but that doesn't make them a business owner. One of the things that I tell a lot of people is that there's a reason there are a lot more employees in the world than there are business owners. Not everybody's cut out to do it, and that's okay. It's a hard thing. I mean, I've been a business owner for 21 years, and there are some days I want to just walk out, hand the keys to somebody, and call it good. You have those days. And it's usually because it's something really stupid. It has nothing to do with working with the clients. It has to do with something really dumb. But there's a lot more good days than bad. But you got to be able to react to those. You've got to be able to stop, look big picture. And looking big picture is very hard for a lot of people, especially in the accounting profession. It's because we are very focused on results and the processing of projects and all of those things. And that's great. But you got to be able to step back and look at this from 50,000 feet from your client's perspective and ultimately what they're trying to accomplish. So we try to figure out who is going to, what are we selling? Are we selling a bunch of assets? Are we selling a bunch of equipment? And that's where all the value is? Or are we selling it in the clients? And if so, those are tough sales. You've got to be able to prove to a buyer that this is something that they want to pay for and it's going to give them the income stream. So you really sit down and look at that, and then from there you just start really talking about that target market. And we see a lot of strategic buying going on right now. Many companies are out there with a lot of cash, and they can't organically grow their top line sales. It's just not happening in this economy. So what they're doing is they're going out and buying it. And we're no different. I mean, we're seeing slow growth. The accounting industry was not immune to this past recession. Usually when we had a recession, it just meant we didn't grow 15%, we only grew 7%. This is the first time we saw retraction, and we didn't lose clients. What we lost was the type of work we were doing. Our clients would say, just do my taxes and don't talk to me about anything else, because I'm just cutting every line item on my income statement in order to survive. That's kind of hard for a firm that really does a lot of consulting work, and we never thought we'd run into that, but it made it a little tight. So you weather that and you kind of move through it, but you really have to be looking at what are the opportunities in those markets and how are you going to take them and expand it. And one of the things you might look at in the brochures I handed out later is you kind of get an idea of our philosophy, and one of the things it has to do with this financial success by design is how do you sit there and work with clients through their whole business life cycle. And I think from a very strong perspective, you've got to be able to do that in order to really understand what kind of markets they're in and where they are in their cycle when they decide to sell. Because you can sell too early and you can sell too late, depending on what you're trying to get. Okay, so more planning is involved to maximize value, and I've alluded to that a little bit. You have to really think about what does this client need to do early on. The one that walks in the door and says, I've decided I want to sell and I need to sell by the end of the year, chances are very good that they're not going to get anywhere near the value that they want. This has got to be planned out. And as I said, the whole idea, the concept of maximizing value by paying some more tax and reporting more income, that's one of the biggest things you can do. You can quit running a bunch of stuff through the company that's personal expense. I don't mind if you buy your big screen TV at home and we run it through the business and it's a big monitor. It's okay. IRS ever wants to know, we'll just carry it in the office and plug it in. But it's, those are the kinds of things you run into that clients are doing. And it's all about what they're trying to accomplish. There's nothing wrong with trying to convert some personal expenses into business expenses, because a lot of times a business owner is working 24/7, and they're working from home, and they're doing these things, and it just makes sense that this stuff is going to get moved there. And it does provide them the opportunity to have some more cash flow that they can keep in their business to continue to grow it. So you're looking for ways for them to maximize. We're always looking at how do we go through continuous process improvements in the business when it comes to managing inventory, and get them doing those processes on a monthly basis so that we can show consistent numbers, so we can get good trends. Because a lot of the time, the buyers as well as the bank are going to look at the trailing 12 months, and then you want to be able to project that out. And if you don't have good numbers to do that to start with, those projections aren't, nobody believes them. So you really have to get to working with them on what they're doing internally in their company. Do they have the right personnel? Are they training their personnel to be able to transition those personnel to the new buyer? Because that's a huge asset. Many of these buyers will come in and they're either looking for somebody to run the business while they're getting ramped up. They don't want to have to replace a bunch of people. They want that consistency. That kind of intellectual property of the people is huge right now. So you've got to be able to make sure that their management team has been trained. These are all things that we work with them to get to that level before they actually list the business. As I mentioned, and this is it's just a picture in the book, we really try to get them to understand where they are in their cycle. You can be, usually when you hit that growth, you're not thinking too much about selling, but boy, when you start to hit the established phase and you've been in it a while, then you're starting to do your financial planning, because you're somewhat comfortable, and you're thinking about, okay, how am I ultimately, as I mature, how am I going to exit this? So you're starting it out a little ways. But it always comes back to this process. And you got to make sure that you don't wait to here, at the end of here, to be thinking about it. Okay? Okay. Hold on one second. I'm going to run a little video here for you. Now, what this is a program that we have, and there's multiple vignettes on different topics, but one of them is succession planning. And just to give you a little idea, one of the options that you can sell is transitioning the whole business to a family member. Now, and quite honestly, when somebody tells me they want to do that, I try to talk them out of it. Because I've seen more of them fail, those transitions. And in fact, statistics show that 70% of the businesses that are sold from one generation to the next failed. And it used to be only 50, it's gotten worse. And the next time after that, only 10% make it. So it's very tough, because there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of family dynamics, especially when you have kids that are in the business and those that aren't, and there's these entitlements that think that they deserve something. This will give you an idea, and I mean, go ahead and laugh. It's fun, but you will be amazed at how this actually happens all the time in these discussions. Hopefully we've got. Okay.
But that's not the way things worked out. And look, we tried everything, but in the end, we had to admit that neither of us was happy, and things weren't going to get better.
Sorry, Tom. I know the divorce can be difficult for everybody. I just hope you and the kids are okay.
So, enough about me. How are things with you?
I still want the same thing. Run the business. Be my own boss.
So, how's the pay?
David's gaining lots of experience and he has a good future. What more could he ask for?
How about a better idea of what's ahead?
What a great dinner. Just lovely.
We always love having you.
Come on, David. What do you really want?
Can't we talk about this at another time?
No. Let's hear what he has to say.
Well, Dad, you're the one who taught me the importance of owning my own business, and that's what I want. I want to make my own mistakes and decisions. Go for it.
Do your own thing.
But David, what do you expect your father to do? Just hand everything over and watch you do your own thing?
Maybe not all at once.
I thought we were getting along pretty well.
I like working with you, Dad, but I have a family to think about now. If something happened to me, what do they have in the way of security?
It's hard to plan for the future, Dad, with the way things are right now.
You know the business will be yours someday.
What? What do you mean?
David's worked hard for the business. Long hours, lots of travel.
I would have too if I'd known where we were going with it.
Oh, yeah, but you couldn't stick it out, so you took off.
All of our children are taken care of equally in our wills.
Equally. What's that? If it's equal, then it's nothing. What are you gonna do? Divide it up 3 ways? Then you'd have no business. You just have to sell it.
But we love all of our children.
But there are 3 children and 1 business. You're gonna have to make a decision.
I agree. David's been doing the work, but I'm still entitled to something. And what about our sister?
I've always wanted the business to stay in the family, and I'll take care of it that way in my new will.
How?
I don't know, but I'll think of something.
All right. We don't have to settle everything tonight.
Look, we're all together now.
Oh, we'll think about it.
Suppose, David, I sold you part of the business.
Well, that's a start.
How about working with me?
That wouldn't change.
So what's wrong with the way we're doing things now?
Well, Dad, at least I'd be part owner. We'd have something.
Don't try to push your dad into something he doesn't want to do.
Well, Mom, something's gotta change.
We feel like we're working all the time, but we're not getting ahead.
Dad, you've got to plan things, or they'll fall apart. I mean, look at me. I'm looking at divorce. Situations change. People change. Your plans have to be written down, organized, or things will end up like this.
Stop it!
So what do you suggest?
Okay, so, it is funny. I actually like the guy's hair. That's the part that usually gets me going. I've had 3 situations where it is almost identical to this. There's usually, other kids in the family that are not involved in the business. And I've seen where they've had some huge, a big sale on an insulation company, and the son was working it, and he made a bunch of money on the deal with Dad, and he just happened to buy in about a year before a big giant company came in and decided to buy him out for, I think it was about $18 million. Well, his sisters weren't in the business. They weren't even living locally. And they wanted to do something for the girls. Well, Dad paid off their mortgages on their homes, bought them new cars. It wasn't enough. Wasn't enough. And I mean, it took a while before the sisters were talking to their brother. And he had nothing to do with it. I mean, he was just happened to time it right, and he was working his butt off in that business. Literally. Had another time when you had, and it's kind of sad because you've got a husband and wife who sell to their kids who are working in the business, and there were 2 components of business. One was retail, one was wholesale. So one boy took the retail, one took the wholesale. And they set this up. It was all done on a contract where the parents are going to get paid monthly. Tried to talk them out of it, but they wanted to do that. The retail side failed. Half of that note they didn't collect for retirement. The other one's still going. But it caused a lot of animosity in the family, especially because the spouses were involved in both businesses. And they ultimately, they don't talk anymore because of some of the stuff that went on, behind the scenes. So these are really, really delicate situations. And a lot of times when they insist on doing this, we not only, work on structuring the transaction and trying to get it so that it fits everybody's needs and try to get some money to the parents. We literally have to bring in their licensed psychologists, bring them in to do family transition planning. because it can turn into a total nightmare if they're not all on the same page. So you try to get this done up front and get everybody comfortable with what's going on. Because from a guilt perspective, parents are going to sit there and try to be equal to all the kids, whether they deserve it or not. So they're very, very difficult transactions to do. I prefer not to do them, but you have to do them. And like I said, I try to talk some business owners out of it, especially if we're not getting any money out of the bank to get it in their pocket, because it's sometimes very tough to collect that, and they're planning on that for their retirement. So I usually try to say, yeah, that's fine. Let's kind of look at this, but why don't we also take it out to market and see what we can get? And I've been successful at times getting them to understand that, you know, it's probably better that you take the money. The kids can still stay in the business because they're key employees and can work it. And if you want to help your kids after the fact, do it through your estate planning based on the proceeds that you get, instead of trying to divide it up this way. And a lot of times that works a lot better, a lot better. So that's one of the most delicate ones you have to work with. A lot of the other ones, when you have third parties, there's none of the emotional stuff in it, even though it's so interesting when you talk about business owners, and business owners are like, oh, this is all about business, until you get ready to sell that business. It becomes very, very personal, because they've worked it for 20 years, and I think it's worth $10 million because I've worked it that long. Great, but I can only justify 5 because this is what the numbers say. And so it's managing those expectations, especially when it comes to dealing with a family situation. I think we're getting pretty close. This is just a list of some of the transactions. I don't know why it rolls, that we've kind of done. It's just a real quick list of the types of business, and you can see it's a. Let me go back. Thank you. It's a very wide range of companies, anywhere from service businesses to a Reaper graphics company. That was a fun one. The dad had sold the business to a couple of key employees. His daughter was out back back east working for an insurance company, and he convinced her. And these 2 employees basically messed it all up, and he had to take it back, and he didn't want to keep working the business. So he convinced his daughter to come back, gave her 51% of the company, so she'd come back. That first year, they had lost about $60,000. Within 5 years, and he didn't work the business, within 5 years, she had that company netting $3 million. And turned around and sold it to a national company for $18 million. The funniest part of that was, she never paid a dime for it. She's very good at what she does. And when